In this video, we're going over some hip flexor stretches or ways to loosen up a tight hip flexor. Now this stretch right here is the most common one. It's the kneeling one. And notice she's doing it wrong because she's extending the back. She's arching the back. So ideally you want to get the pelvis locked in, and you can actually contract the glutes to stabilize the low back while you're doing this. So now we're going to have her contract that glute, tighten it up, and she's going to do that same forward lunging motion. Notice that the low back isn't moving anymore. Important thing to realize with tight hip flexors is sometimes you have to stabilize the trunk or the core area to make the hip flexor work better, basically making it so it doesn't have to work so hard, which is what we're going to do in some of the other exercises to come. Another one, since the hip is a triplanar joint that moves in 3 motions, we like to rotate here, and we're going to dip back a little bit and drive the hips forward. You're driving the hips forward through movement and contraction of the glute max, which is then in turn going to stretch and lengthen the hip flexor in the front or get it to relax through a concept called reciprocal inhibition. She is holding her abdominal area here to make sure she's keeping that whole spine area, that trunk, that core, in control, such as in the last exercise we had her tighten it up there rather than extending the back. Next, we're going to use a foam roller just under what we call the PSI, so the bony spot or the dimple area of the back. We're going to put the hip flexor in question with the leg straight on the ground, and we're bringing this hip, the left hip, up, and she's going to cradle it between her fingers at this point in time. Ideally, you want to have that knee straight and drive the heel as long as you can. Now, this is an example of passive stretching of the hip flexor still, and she's going to do it one more time passively. Notice that her core is still tight and it's still not arching. Now this next one, I'm going to have her do the motion actually without the assistance of her hand, which is really going to help out with keeping that trunk and core engaged, which is going to help the hip flexor actually have a better advantage to do the job that it's supposed to. This exercise is actually much better. We're going to drive that heel long, by the way. Keep that heel real long, or keep that leg long. The better you can get this exercise to get the hip flexor to function better if you do it without the assistance of the fingers and the hands. That is called a passive stretch. We're going into more of an active stretch in these other types of exercises to come. One more rep there, driving the knee as close as she can to the head, slow on the return, keeping the trunk really stable. Now this next one, we're going to have a band around the feet, and she's going to lean into the wall, almost like a sprint start. There's an exercise we call the sprint start. Elbows up, be straight as a board, and she's going to drive the knee up really slowly and then return. If you're doing this exercise, you can realize that it's actually, you keep the core engaged just like all the other ones. And she's going to show us a couple bad reps right here. See, she's extending, her head's actually going up. She should be flat as a board, driving the knee up. She's engaging the trunk now, leaning into the wall, drive the knee up hard. And you can even go faster with this. The more stable you make the core, the better knee drive you're actually going to get. There's a quick one right there. This is what we do when people are more advanced and the hip flexor hasn't flared up in a little bit of time. This is a very sport-specific motion for running. Now the last one is a supine variety of the last few that we did actually, and we're going to add some resistance with a band just like this. I'll put a link below so you can get a band. She's going to put it just the same height as her foot, hook it right around the top, lean back. Now she's actually, we're going to have her put the foot up actually on the bench. You can do it with the foot on the ground, which you'll show later that it's a little bit harder for her to find the ground because she's short and the table's a little high. So here she's going to do with her spine extended again. I know we're hammering on this. We're hammering on the spinal extension because it is so important. If you're a runner or an athlete, you want to limit the amount of change you have in the trunk. You'll lose power that way. You'll get injuries that way, not just to the spine or the back, but also to the hip and the knee. So now she's engaging the trunk and driving hard, bringing the knee up to the chest and getting long. Drive it up again. Good. Slow on the way down. You'll notice now she's going to try to put her foot on the ground, and she can't reach. So to accommodate this, you might get a lower bench, or you get something like a couple plates so she can stabilize herself. It's really hard to get the same amount of hip drive or knee drive if she doesn't have some stable platform for the other foot. So we went right back to the default foot on bench. Keep cueing the trunk, drive hard. Hope this was helpful, and make sure those tight hip flexors are tight for a reason.